Welcome to Unveiling Mythical Legends. Today we're diving into 3 absolutely outrageous events that are so crazy, you won't believe they actually happened. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this with your friends. You'll want to keep talking about these stories after watching. Our first story takes us back to 1848. There was a young man named Phineas Gage, only 25 years old, looking for work in New York. At that time, the whole Western world was going crazy building railroads. From steel and tracks to bars and restaurants, life revolved around the railroads. And Gage just happened to have the rarest skill of all. He was a blasting engineer, basically an expert in explosives. This wasn't something he learned from books. He grew up in mining camps with his father, mastering the craft firsthand.
Wow, so he came from a skilled family. What happened after he joined the company?
Listen to this. Just 2 months after starting, Gage was promoted to supervisor of the blasting team. That meant he was personally in charge of handling the explosives. That day, he even bought himself a massive iron rod, about 1.2 meters long, weighing 6 kilograms, one end pointed and the other flat. Can you imagine the scene? He carried it to work and back every single day. It was like his prized possession, never leaving his side.
I've got to ask, what was he even doing with that iron rod?
This brings us to September 3, 1848. Gage was tasked with blasting a passage between 2 number 3 shafts. He skillfully directed the workers to drill holes in the rock, loaded them with gunpowder and fuses, and then used the iron rod to push everything deep inside. I won't even go into how precise his movements were. The key point is this: just as he was pushing the gunpowder, he glanced back at the noisy workers behind him, and the tip of the rod happened to touch the gunpowder. Bang! The explosion went off instantly.
Oh my God, wouldn't that have just blown him to pieces?
Exactly, that's the unbelievable part. The iron rod shot out like a missile, entering through his left cheek, passing straight through his left eye, piercing his brain, and exiting through the top of his skull. Blood and brain matter were everywhere. Everyone on site thought there was no way he'd survive. But guess what? Gage didn't go down. He paused for a moment, looked around at the people nearby, and could even speak, asking what had just happened. He was completely lucid, totally unlike someone who had suffered such a grievous injury.
Wait, you're saying half his brain got blown away and he could still talk normally? What happened to him afterward?
Exactly. This case is documented at Harvard Medical School. Gage was later taken to a hotel and even sat up on his own, waiting for the doctor, completely lucid. The doctor was shocked, thinking there was no way he'd survive, but miraculously he did. His personality changed though. He became a bit childish, made unrealistic promises, but gradually stabilized. He remained single all his life, and had an almost obsessive attachment to the iron rod that had blown half his brain apart, carrying it everywhere. Ultimately, Gage died 12 years after the accident from a sudden epileptic seizure, but his skull was preserved at Harvard Medical School, serving as a reminder of how much mystery and resilience the human brain contains. Alright, Gage's story was enough to make anyone's brain explode. Now, let's switch gears and talk about a bizarre Russian fake death incident. This happened in early June 2011, in Kazan. A 49-year-old woman named Fadjilia Mukhametsyonova woke up that morning feeling a sudden discomfort in her stomach, some chest pain, and cold sweats all over her body.
Wow, how did she react at the time? Was she really panicking?
Actually, that day she felt unwell, but didn't pay too much attention to it. She just took the day off to rest. She got up to make breakfast for her husband, but the discomfort kept growing. Eventually, she told him her chest hurt badly and she was breaking out in cold sweats, and before she could even take a few steps, she completely fainted to the ground.
Oh my God, her husband must have been terrified.
Yes, he immediately called an ambulance. When the medical team arrived, based on outward signs, she showed no vital signs. She was then rushed to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead on the spot due to a sudden heart attack. She and her husband had been living together for nearly 30 years, so the news was a devastating blow to him, but life had to go on.
Wait, but you said it was a false death? So she wasn't really dead?
Haha, and this is the unbelievable part. When Fadjilia was placed in the coffin, ready for the funeral, Friends and family gathered the next day to pay their last respects, and her husband even put on a suit to give her a final farewell. Everyone thought it was just a normal funeral, but then, Fujiro suddenly sat up.
What? She sat up? Everyone must have screamed.
Yes, the scene was complete chaos. She screamed, but it was barely audible, like her throat was dry and cracked. Her husband immediately held her, and her screaming stopped, tears streaming down uncontrollably. But after a while, she collapsed back into his arms, and once again, stopped breathing. Everyone there was utterly stunned, even her friends and family couldn't believe what they were witnessing.
Wow, this sounds just like a horror movie. So what happened next? Did the hospital try to resuscitate her?
Yes, the funeral home rushed her back to the hospital within 12 minutes for resuscitation, but the hospital declared her dead again. Later investigations revealed that when she first collapsed, she had actually entered an extreme state of apparent death, where her breathing and heartbeat were extremely faint, and her pulse nearly undetectable, so it looked like she had died. Scientifically, this condition is called biological suspended animation, and it can even be prolonged using low temperatures or certain chemical methods.
Wow, so she actually never really died, it was just that everyone misread the signs?
Exactly. And the fascinating part is that this apparent death in humans is actually a highly advanced biological phenomenon. Movies like Interstellar or The Midnight Traveler often use similar plot devices. Scientists have even experimented with animals. Using cold temperatures or chemical agents, they can induce a suspended state in mice, dogs, and even pigs. Some of them recover with no brain damage at all. NASA, for example, started researching cryogenic hibernation in 2016, attempting to put humans or animals into a suspended state for up to 14 days and then revive them.
Wow, that's so high-tech. So why didn't Fujiro finally wake up?
The stress and panic of the funeral, combined with the strain on her heart, ultimately triggered her condition, and this time she didn't wake up. In other words, her first collapse was scientifically a suspended death or apparent death, while the second time, due to stress and heart complications, she truly passed away. The whole incident is both chilling and a humbling reminder of the limits of the human body. The first two stories, one where a man survived a metal rod through his skull, and another where someone attended their own funeral, are already mind-blowing. But the next one? It might keep you awake at night, because it happened during something we all imagine as blissful, a honeymoon. And the location? The Great Barrier Reef, a paradise countless people dream of visiting.
As soon as you said honeymoon in the Great Barrier Reef, I got a weird feeling. Aren't places like that supposed to be insanely romantic?
Exactly. In 2003, a newlywed couple, Tina and Gaby, traveled to Australia for their honeymoon. They weren't exactly wealthy, and the trip had been postponed for over a year. In fact, Gaby's father even helped cover the costs. So they cherished it all the more, planning every detail meticulously. The highlight of their entire trip was scuba diving at the Great Barrier Reef on the 6th day.
So were both of them good at diving?
And here's the first key difference. Gaby had been passionate about diving since childhood. He genuinely loved it as a hobby. Tina, on the other hand, was quite the opposite. She didn't really enjoy spending long periods underwater and would feel anxious and uneasy, not full-blown panic, but definitely resistant. Still, to be with her husband, she forced herself to take lessons and get certified, eventually earning her international scuba diving license.
That sounds a bit heartbreaking, being afraid, yet pushing through just for the sake of your partner.
Exactly. That day, they went with 4 other tourists on a boat heading to the famous wreck dive site. The captain repeatedly emphasized safety rules: pair up, never separate, always watch out for each other. After the briefing, the 6 of them donned their gear and entered the water one by one. The whole scene was calm and serene, sunlight filtering down 30 meters underwater, the sea a blue so unreal it almost didn't look real.
So everything was fine at first, right?
At first, everything was completely normal. They reached the wreck site without issue and were about to start exploring when Gaby noticed his dive computer malfunctioning. This device is crucial. It shows oxygen levels and depth, and without it, the risk is extremely high. He signaled Tina, and the 2 of them ascended together, asking the captain for assistance to fix the problem.
That step was actually very professional, They didn't try to tough it out.
Exactly. Once the equipment was fixed, they descended again and rejoined the group. But shortly after, things started to go wrong. While the captain was filling out the log on the surface, he suddenly noticed an unusual surge of bubbles coming up from the water. His immediate reaction was that something had gone wrong, because only when divers are in extreme panic, losing control of their breathing, does that much bubbling appear.
Just hearing that makes my heart race.
Then Gaby suddenly surfaced alone, panicked, and before even climbing onto the boat he shouted that Tina had passed out underwater and he couldn't lift her. The captain didn't hesitate, he immediately slung on his tank and jumped into the sea. Using his rescue experience, he quickly descended and soon spotted Tina lying motionless on the seabed.
Oh my God, that must have been terrifying to witness.
The captain lifted Tina, activated her buoyancy device, and brought her to the surface. On board, he immediately began CPR while calling for coastal rescue. But 45 minutes passed, and Tina still didn't regain consciousness. The post-incident report later showed the cause of death was an air embolism, air blocking a critical blood vessel.
That's usually caused by ascending too quickly or holding your breath, right?
Exactly, and here's where it gets complicated. According to Gaby, Tina suddenly panicked underwater, flailing and even pulling off his mask, then sank. But the other 4 divers told a completely different story. They claimed they saw Gaby forcefully holding Tina underwater, and the position didn't look like a rescue, it looked more like he was restraining her.
Wait, is holding someone underwater considered really abnormal?
Extremely abnormal. Any kind of embrace while diving affects buoyancy and breathing, actually increasing the risk. What's more, the 4 other divers said that when Gaby finally let go of Tina, he didn't immediately try to rescue her. Instead, he swam toward the wreck, which directly contradicts his later account.
This really doesn't sound like a simple accident.
Exactly. Because of these testimonies, Tina's family contacted the police. Australian authorities reopened the investigation and ultimately concluded that Gaby most likely turned off Tina's air supply underwater, and that embrace was actually to prevent her from saving herself. He was charged with manslaughter by negligence.
Did he plead guilty?
At first, no, he consistently insisted he was trying to save her. But eventually, whether due to immense psychological pressure or the high legal costs, he chose to plead guilty. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison. After serving his term, he returned to the U.S. The U.S. authorities later tried to prosecute him again, but the case was ultimately dropped due to insufficient evidence.
So in the end, this incident still leaves a huge question mark.
Exactly. That's also why this photo unsettled so many people. It was taken by one of the fellow divers. Lying on the seafloor is Tina. Everything around her looks so calm, yet she will never come back.
The scariest part of stories like this is that there's no clear answer, only a choice of whom to believe.
Exactly. So what do you think? Was this just a diving accident, or a tragedy that had been calculated all along? If you have your own thoughts, feel free to share them in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, like and share, because these real-life events are often crueler than fiction, and all the more worth remembering.